Hi everyone, I'm Sebastian and lead architect at Vertic. I'm going to talk about principles today, but let me start with a question. Who even needs architects anyway? But before I talk about that, we'll talk about what I mean with good architecture first. So is architecture the important decisions? I would say no. Decisions that are important are just someone declared it as important. It's not necessarily important. Is it the early decisions? I would also say no. You can use agile architecture or innovation, iterative architecture, etc. So it's also not that. I would say architecture are the decisions that are hard to reverse. But we can convert hard to reverse decisions into reversible ones if you think a bit. And meaning that our good architecture is then to make the hard to reverse decisions reversible. So good architecture is to get rid of architecture. But it also means architecture is popping up everywhere, and the single architect cannot just do that. So an architect's value is inversely proportional to the number of decisions they make. They need to decentralize their decisions, otherwise they will not be successful, so they need to act as a guide, not as a dictator. They could, for example, together with their team, write down principles, as Ray Dalio explains in his book. Principles can act as a common goal and as a framework for common and informed decision-making. Now, what kind of decisions can you support with these principles? Like, do I self-host my service, or do I go and use something from the cloud? Or which approach am I using for micro frontends? These are kind of decisions you could use principles for. So structuring principle, here's an example. You can write down the name, a statement, the rationale, the implications which you need to carry out this principle, and the self-assessment to figure out if I make a decision, does it comply with the principle? In our case, we decided to structure our principles in a tree, like a hierarchy. So the first principle we have, the root principle, is that we make principle-based engineering decisions. And all the other principles are sub-principle of that. So all you can see here are principles in our case. We also added some other non-necessarily architectural principles, like security is everyone's job. And you can kind of see where this is going in this case. But you have to look out for certain things, like don't write down principles which are practices. Like there are many good practices to follow, nothing wrong, like the ones promoted by the book Accelerate, but they're just not so useful if you apply them as a principle. On the other hand, also, you should avoid to be too general with your principle, like write good code. That's not very useful, where if you do the opposite, that's just ridiculous, right? So there's no value in having a too general principle. The good principles, they provide a clear direction, meaning you can use the principle to make decisions. It helps you. They're timeless, meaning you don't have to adapt your principle every 3 months. And they're universal, so you can apply the principle in many different various situations to make these decisions. We also found that the good principles, they're owned by the teams. They feel a sense of ownership, for example, by creating them and refining them continuously. One of our example principles here, I want to highlight one, it's our anti-corruption layers, meaning we have systems and we have external systems, and we insert a layer between, which avoids having the external systems domain model polluting our own domain model, and also during production use, we don't suffer necessarily from the disruptions. And this, because many of our applications depend on these external systems, which might run on not so great infrastructure, they might have outages, but we introduced this layer, but it also has the implication that we have extra latency, we might have to operate a new service, etc. But the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. That's why we implemented this principle, and we now make integration with new systems using that principle. Now, if you apply principles, you don't just win and you're done. You might consider other approaches as well, which complement them, like ADRs, decision records. You can also track the use of the principles in your ADRs, or you could introduce an architecture forum, where you can discuss the decisions that are architecturally significant, challenge each other, and get to better decisions, and refine your principles in the forum as well. So ultimately, if your teams embrace and establish principles in your organization, they can avoid reinventing the wheel, they can make informed choices, and develop solutions that align with organizational goals. What are your principles? Thank you.